Now, the reason you're here today is to hear from the State of Procurement Tech Stack from Tonkean. Matt Aronson's going to join us along with Jamie Fiore and Sheena Smith and myself, Dawn Tura. So a couple things I just want to go over. Matt, and I'd like to welcome all of these folks on screen. He's a senior director of product marketing at Tonkean, where he drives go-to-market strategy, positioning, messaging, and sales enablement across the company's full portfolio. Now, he also has a career spanning product marketing, product management, and a generalist marketing leadership. He's worked across all industries, including advertising, technology, building automation, employee communications, and process orchestration. With him today is Jamie Fiore, and he is a senior director at Rise Now, providing procurement advisory services. Now, he's focused on transformation facilitated through optimized S2P technology. Prior to working there, he was a principal consultant at Nitor Partners. With him today is Sheena Smith, a dear friend of mine and I've known for years, where she leads strategic growth initiatives across new markets and service lines with a focus on executive alignment, narrative development, and unlocking progress in complex procurement and supply chain transformations. Now, prior to Rise Now, you probably knew her as the Chief Strategy Officer of Spend Matters. So, folks, these are our panelists for today, and I'm going to hand it over. Matt's going to take us through some study that, some information that he has, and then we're going to open up for discussion. Now, once again, please use your Q&A button if you have any questions. I don't want them to get lost in the webinar chat. So please use the Q&A button, and we will get to your questions as soon as we get through the survey release and a brief conversation with our panelists. So, Matt, take it away.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to thank Dawn and the SIG team for hosting us today, as well as Sheena and Jamie from Rise Now for joining and lending some perspective here. As Dawn said, I lead product marketing at Tonkean. I'm joining you all virtually today from Oakland, California, and looking forward to sharing with you all a preview of what we've learned in this research. For those who may not be familiar with Tonkean, and I should progress here to the next slide. There we go. Everything working properly. We are the orchestration platform that helps procurement, among other functions, orchestrate their complexity so that they can experience simplicity. We wrap around your existing tech stack and we orchestrate workflows across all of them while providing that front door experience that employees actually want to use, driving greater process adoption, efficiency, and effectiveness. That perspective, seeing how enterprise processes work on a really granular level across fragmented tool landscapes is exactly what drove us to commission and package this research because frankly, we kept hearing the same pain points from procurement leaders and we wanted to understand how widespread some of these challenges really are and what the outlook of folks like you is in terms of addressing them. So we partnered with Procurement Research. Here we go, next slide. This spring to survey 300 senior procurement practitioners globally, and I mean truly senior, 45% directors, another 25% at VP or C-suite level. These are the people who are writing the checks and setting the strategy, and that was very intentional on our part. It's possible, perhaps even likely, that some of you who joined us here today participated in this survey. So if that's the case, thank you very much. If not, thank you for being here anyway. You can see a breakdown of our sample on the screen here. It gives us confidence that we are seeing the full picture. Nearly 40% represent enterprises with more than 20,000 employees, with solid geographic coverage as well. 25% of our respondents come from global companies, 23% European, 19% North American, 16% Asia Pacific, and the remainder spread across Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Australia, Oceania. 20 different industries represented, as well as a range of different specialties, direct and indirect procurement, supplier relationship management, procurement operations, strategic sourcing and category management, procurement center of excellence. And we got a balance across industries and roles in this sample that I just have to commend our friends at Procurement Research for finding for us. What emerged is a story that I think will feel familiar to most of you, but seeing some of these things quantified may surprise you nonetheless. So let's get into it. The procurement technology stack is steadily expanding. So, starting with the current state of our tech stacks, because the first big finding is that they're not just growing, they are exploding in complexity. We found 10 technology categories with greater than 50% penetration rates. Enterprise resource planning systems lead at 85%. No surprise there. But look at the rest. So, risk management at 76%, document management at 75%, inventory management at 71%, source to pay and procure to pay at 69%. The list goes on. Something from the crosstabs that caught my attention in heavily regulated verticals. So, think pharma, financial services, energy, supplier risk tooling jumps another 9 percentage points above the average. And indeed, it does seem that the compliance requirements are still the strongest purchase driver in enterprise procurement. But here's the insight that kind of changes everything. And I think this is borne out throughout the rest of the data that we're going to present today. The maturity question is no longer do you have tool X? It's how well does tool X talk to tool Y? Because as we'll see, having all these tools creates a new set of wrinkles and challenges for us to confront. And those problems start with the foundational systems. So the phrase system of record is basically dead, right? 97% of you are managing more than one ERP. Nearly 70% are juggling two or three instances, and 28% are managing 4 to 7 different ERP systems. The P2P and S2P landscape shows slightly better consolidation, 19% using just one and 16% using four or more. Now, the why here, well, we did not go there explicitly in the research, but from what we've seen, M&A activity, right? Regional requirements, business unit autonomy. These are the usual suspects fragmenting those core systems. Now, you might think that fewer ERPs would make life easier, but the surprising finding here is that that's not necessarily the case. Whether you're managing one ERP or 7, only about 20% of organizations call their technology stack fully integrated, and we'll get more into those data in a moment here. But those integration challenges persist regardless of how many systems you are trying to connect. On top of all these systems, organizations are also consuming massive amounts of external data. And I mean everyone, not a single respondent among the 300 included in our sample said that they don't purchase any external data feeds. I don't think that's very surprising, but it's worth underscoring. Market pricing data leads at 68%, supplier performance metrics at 67%, ESG and sustainability data also at 67%. The pattern here as well intensifies in regulated industries. So these teams subscribe to, on average, 7 more data feeds than their peers. More compliance requirements mean more data sources, which means more integration points to manage. So we have this picture emerging, right? Expanding tool sets, fragmented core systems, growing data consumption. The trajectory is probably predictable. For all the money being spent on point solutions and data, the connective tissue between and among them remains painfully thin. Only 18% of leaders say their technologies and data sources are fully integrated, meaning that data flows from request to pay without manual work to usher processes across software environments, people, and teams. When respondents were asked to select their top 2 barriers to adopting new technologies, you sort of see that pain being underscored. The top 2 selections were lengthy implementation timelines and lack of interoperability. For most procurement teams, it is not about IT creating a bottleneck. At least that is not considered a root cause here. It's not about the lack of buy-in from the executive team, though I do think it's worth noting that that low 6% figure for lack of executive sponsorship or buy-in might be colored somewhat by the nature of our sample. I think it's human nature that people do not tend to point the finger at themselves, and that theme will come back here later. But anyway, here's a data point that is not on the slide, but certainly caught my attention. Organizations that said, or at least whose respondents said that they had an orchestration platform were 47% more likely to say that their tech stack is fully integrated, which is a pretty striking difference there. And it makes sense. This is one of the key roles of orchestration to make all your tools play nicely together and operate amongst one another in the context of your processes, your policies, and your people. Here we go. Fragmentation uh, like this creates real pain for the people who actually use these systems. So 88% of respondents said that the employees who they serve need to access two or more systems for a typical request. Nearly a quarter said that they need three or more. And I think you can sort of draw a straight line from there to this next data point, which is just 7% of respondents think that their stakeholders are very satisfied with the overall experience. Respondents also rated the transparency and visibility available to requesters as pretty poor, with 73% saying that requesters can only kind of sort of see what's going on with their requests once they're submitted. Another interesting tidbit here, teams that let requesters initiate intake through Slack or Microsoft Teams using plain language more than double their satisfaction scores. Granted, these are satisfaction scores through the lens of what senior procurement leaders are reporting in our survey, but I do think we can take some directional insight from them in a case like this. So when organizations meet people where they work and handle the complexity behind the scenes, you see satisfaction improving dramatically. All of this system fragmentation rolls up into what procurement teams cite as their biggest challenge, which is misaligned processes and systems, not between stakeholders and procurement, but between systems, stakeholders, and the processes themselves. And these are not just efficiency problems. They sap morale, they invite risk, they steal time away from strategic work. And underscoring that, respondents with poorly integrated environments were 70% more likely to cite manual workflows and inefficiency as among their top three frustrations. So that connectivity gap translates directly into daily pain. The freeform responses from this section really drove this home. So better connectivity with procurement tools and other enterprise systems is needed. The interface in many procurement tools is still not intuitive. Employees push back when a new tool is introduced because of poor change management. Every comment really pointed to the same root cause, gaps between great point solutions and the real world flow of the work. So given all these challenges, what are procurement leaders prioritizing to fix them? So the hierarchy of goals expressed by our respondents helps to tell the story. Improving compliance tops the list at 60% because ESG audits, supply chain disclosures, data privacy mandates, these things keep landing in procurement's inbox. Increasing automation follows at 53% because teams are drowning in manual workarounds caused by all that system fragmentation that we just discussed. Experience ranks third at 47%. And this is crucial. Leaders recognize that if employees hate the process, they will circumvent it almost universally. So that obviously undermines compliance. It's all connected, right? So spend under management ranks fourth at 35%, which might seem surprisingly low until you consider, we asked people to choose their top two, or was it three here? Well, that is, I think, more clear in the ebook. In any case, when you consider 63% of firms currently control only 50 to 75% of their spend through formal channels, with that much room for improvement, why isn't this a higher priority? One interpretation is that the answer lies in the other top priorities, right? People recognize you can't meaningfully improve spend under management without first fixing compliance, automation, and experience issues. That friction has to be resolved before spend capture and spend influence can improve. Now, when we look at how organizations are trying to address these automation challenges, their second highest priority, one technology has not so quietly moved from experimental to mainstream, right? From hype to hyperbole to real life adoption. That's artificial intelligence. Three-quarters of respondents already generate POs, statements of work, or RFPs with LLMs. Wow, right? Three-quarters. Two-thirds run Slack or Teams bots for policy FAQs. 63% say that they are using AI agents to complete automated tasks regularly. Now, I'm going to give a quick aside here. That seems high to me. I'm going to point the finger back at ourselves here a little bit because, in hindsight, I don't love the way we phrased that answer option. It has a contradiction baked into it. There are all kinds of AI inflected tools that can use LLMs to carry out discrete tasks. We would argue that that does not constitute an AI agent specifically because an agent goes beyond task execution. An agent can take entire projects or initiatives on, make its own interpretations about the various tasks involved in delivering on that objective, and then go out and execute on them. Task execution alone does not an agent make. And we did sort of conflate those two things here, regrettably. So that's something we can improve upon and clarify in next year's survey, which do come back next year because we'll have this is our first annual State of Procurement Tech Stack survey. Years 2 and 3, it starts to get interesting because we can start trending the data. It is a bit hard to tease apart here, but again, based on the preponderance of responses, I am assuming that most respondents who selected that option were in fact emphasizing the automated tasks component and not the agent component. And this is where the orchestration story sort of comes full circle. AI adoption is being constrained by the same connectivity problems that we've been discussing. We found a 23-point higher AI tool usage rate in the somewhat integrated stacks versus the loosely integrated stacks when we run that pivot and look at those crosstabs. Organizations want AI to solve their automation challenges, but AI can only be as effective as the underlying infrastructure allows. Looking forward, leaders want AI that behaves less like a clever assistant and more like a networked colleague. When we asked about desired AI capabilities, 58% ranked integration with existing systems as their top requirement. Multi-agent architecture follows at 47%, and then goal-driven autonomy at 43%. Accessibility to employees in their preferred tools came in at 36%. Finally, comprehensive reporting and audit trails at 17%. But the barriers on the right-hand side here reveal the complexity of enterprise AI adoption. Data privacy and security concerns lead at 52%. Over half the panel fears sensitive data exposure. Data accuracy and reliability concerns follow at 40%, and then implementation complexity at 33%. The smaller barriers include insufficient executive support at 19%. That one once again, we'll acknowledge that our sample could be a little bit biased on this one. Compliance concerns at 18% and limited internal expertise at 13%. That one is going to be an interesting one to trend over the next 5 years as we continue to ask these questions for what it's worth. Worth noting here that while integration ranks as the top desired capability, the primary barriers are really about AI governance, keeping data secure, ensuring reliable outputs. The technical integration challenges, while important, aren't what's keeping leaders up at night necessarily when it comes to AI adoption. The qualitative input we got on the forward-looking questions, oops, I went, there we go, uh, was also pretty telling here. We are excited about AI in procurement, but we need clearer use cases and better internal readiness. AI has problems, excuse me, AI has promise. Of course, it also has problems, but we hesitate because of data privacy concerns. We're seeing the enthusiasm there. I mean, these quotes really mirror what I've encountered in the real world when talking to procurement folks. That enthusiasm is tempered by the same infrastructural and governance challenges that we've seen throughout. So I'll give you the five signals that define this moment in procurement technology is can be surmised from this research. First, fragmentation persists. Multiple ERPs, source to pay and procure to pay suites and custom portals are the norm, not the exception. Second, data outpaces insight. So everyone's buying data, but turning disparate signals into actionable intelligence at the point of decision making remains a work in progress. Third, AI moves from hype to mandate. Leaders see both opportunity and risk, but governance and connectivity will determine success. And fourth, orchestration becomes the differentiator. So teams that have connected stacks move faster, deliver better stakeholder experiences, and better stakeholder satisfaction. And finally, as a sort of broad one here, getting control of tech stacks is more critical than ever. Making tools work for people rather than the other way around remains procurement's defining operational challenge. So that concludes our preview, our overview of our findings here. Please do check out the PDF ebook, which will land in all of your inboxes, because what you've seen here is more of a summary and a sampling. There's more to be found in the full report, including, for example, which technology categories our respondents are prioritizing for investment this year. And so there's a little teaser. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. Looking forward to discussing the findings.
Yeah. So, Matt, thank you so much. Now, folks, we are going to send you in about 24 hours a link to today's webinar, along with a copy of the slides, along with a link to the ebook, so you can download it at your leisure. But also make sure you share it with all of your friends and colleagues, because it's a really exciting study that they did. Now, I have a few questions for you, and then I'd like to open it to the floor for questions from our audience, because we have a really engaged audience. So folks, please put your questions into the Q&A button. Don't use the chat if you don't mind. I really appreciate it. So if you don't mind, Sheena, I'd like to start with you, because I was somewhat surprised, but not necessarily surprised at some of the findings and the complications and frustrations. So can you tell us if these, first off, were you surprised? And then if not, why do we continue to see the same problems recur year after year after year? And then I would ask you, why are the underlying issues from which these responses stem so hard to solve?
Yeah. To be honest, I'm not surprised by any of the findings. I think it reflects what Jamie and I see day after day in working with our client base at Rise Now. It reflects things that I have seen since 2010 when I first entered this industry and people were scared of the cloud. And so it's kind of funny to see the same problem sets. We have different tools to solve them now, which I think is the most exciting part. I think we are at a time in the procurement space and frankly in the technology space across the board where those problems can be solved, right? We can solve almost anything with tech and orchestration at this point, but I keep going back to this concept of human orchestration because with getting that tech in, you have to orchestrate the human change to make it work for an organization. And so we hear the phrase, we'll free you up to do more strategic work. And we always talk about what that strategic work is, right? It's different for every organization or function. But more strategic work is actually scary. People know how to manually match POs. People know how to manually read contract clauses. And so it's a little scary to think about that bigger thinking and that working on the business instead of in the business. That stuff is really, really, really hard for humans. And I think what we really have here is a psychology problem versus a tech problem. I'd be curious if anyone agrees with that, Matt, Don, or Jamie.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came up was change management and talking about that. And I think that's been something that a lot of companies have been lacking as well. They put these new systems in place, and then there's no change management. A lot of people think that change management means training, and there's a lot more to it than just the training aspect. So that change management gap, I think, drives a lot of that as well.
I think I absolutely agree with you because I think, people don't realize that it takes about 2 years of working in a new manner for that change to have been created a permanent change. And so if any time during those 2 years you fall back into not supporting it or leadership fails a test, people want to revert back to what they know. So you're right, matching POs, that's easy. But there, all right, so I'm going to make a plug for SIG University. That's why you want to educate people so they learn what those strategic tests are. So thank you for that. But I'm going to ask you, Jamie, then, since you came in. So you work with procurement leaders through Rise Now, right now, leveraging technology to facilitate transformation. How do you think that this all jibes with what you're seeing with your clients that you work with? Are the problems and frustrations familiar? You mentioned change management. And which do you think is the most salient? For example, a credible amount of ERP is apparently in use. What else?
The ERPs is a big one and gathering that data information from a lot of places. Two areas that we're seeing a lot of clients ask questions about is supplier onboarding. So the ability to be able to automate that process and have it be a little bit more dynamic than it is today. We've got a lot of clients that whether they're getting a cafeteria person or a high-end supplier in place, they're doing the same onboarding process. So a lot of people are looking to make that one simpler. And then the data analytics are getting a hold of information. Spend data is out there, but the rest of the information as far as how the organizations are performing, they struggle with. So there are a lot of them are looking for technology to help with that because the tech stacks that they have in place today aren't doing it for them.
So you say incredible number of ERPs. Like how many ERPs are you seeing in a single organization?
We had one client that had over 50.
We have one client that had over 80,
Yeah.
84.
84 ERPs.
84 ERPs and a lot due to M&A activity. So they would buy up other organizations and then have trouble integrating the ERPs across their global functions. But yeah, I mean, that specific client, Jamie, had how many records of just Granger in their supplier record? 30 plus? It's crazy to think about. And it seems like such an easy problem to solve, right? I mean, like these intake and orchestration platforms, especially on the orchestration side, I want to be very, very distinctive between the intake part and the orchestration part. They can deal with that. They can, but the change management internally, the consolidation of systems, it's incredibly hard when you think about all of the moving parts. And I think that's spending 15 years at Spend Matters, thinking just purely on the tech side, and then now coming over to the services side and getting access to all the different things that touch a procurement department has been so eye-opening. It's tough out there. It's incredibly tough out there.
Wow, that's incredible. So, Matt, can I ask you then, does process orchestration help us with these multiple ERPs?
Absolutely. I think in several different ways, right? Starting with the requester and stakeholder experience. When you think about the very kind of taxing change management processes that uh, define, for example, post M&A integration, um, consolidating ERPs is a years-long project, right?
Mhm.
You can uh, create an experience layer on top of that such that the everyday employees who work with the procurement team um, don't really need to be exposed to the ins and outs of that process, right? They can have a consistent sort of smooth sailing experience while behind the scenes that complicated work goes on, right? Furthermore, right, when there are certain data points that live in one instance and other data points that live in another in a complex sourcing process, for example, especially for a big project that might span multiple business units and multiple instances, um, being able to really simply and in a straightforward way sort of align and reconcile the knowledge and data that lives in those multiple buckets, I think adds a lot of value as well.
Yeah. So in other words, I don't need to know how to access all 84 ERPs. The
Right.
orchestration level or layer does that
Yes.
for me. I
That's
just
right.
need to know how to ask. So that makes I mean, and people, when we say 84 instances, and Sheena and Jamie back me up if this is correct, that could be like you have SAP 16 times, so there are different instances of SAP. And then you might have, Oracle or something like that. Is that this? So it's not just SAP, it could be different instances, different versions, it could be cloud, it could be on-prem. Do we truly have it that messed up?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
One word answer, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you think about, Sheena, I'm going to go to you first. When you think about enterprise leaders in procurement and beyond attempting to solve some of these underlying issues, it seems that we get from this report a lot of band-aids versus
Mhm.
stitches to permanently fix something. So how can you go about addressing the fundamental underlying issues here as opposed to opting for band-aid solutions?
Yeah, I guess think about taking cold medicine when you're sick versus going to your annual physical and trying to prevent getting sick in the first place. So I think there's a busyness factor of people are being pulled in so many different directions. Procurement does not just buy stuff, right, for an organization. There, it goes well beyond that, and that has so many different layers of what someone may be doing in a day and what they're getting pulled into and what they must do to keep the function alive and running for a business versus even thinking about how to strategically plan for their processes, for upskilling their people, for doing all that necessary work. But in the meantime, business needs to happen. And so I think Jamie and I see in a lot of Rise Now projects where people have two, three, four, five different jobs that they're doing. One of them may be running a transformation, but they have to think about too many different things to be able to focus on the necessity of the long-term fix versus the short-term fix. And I think we have to acknowledge that for procurement people. Sometimes all you have is a band-aid.
Yeah, and that goes back to the fact that, we can't free people up to get, I mean, they're sitting at 10, maybe 10 feet off the ground when we want them to soar at 20,000 feet. And so
Exactly.
10 feet off the ground, a Band-Aid is going to be the quickest fix I can find. So I'll just slap it on and keep moving, which
Yep.
unfortunately is what we see a lot. So
Yeah.
Jamie, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the importance for procurement teams as well as stakeholders of having seamless, reliable access to provide up-to-date data. It, I don't know how we're getting by without it, and I don't know how we can. I mean, it's so important, but what would you say about that?
Yeah, it's an issue today. But I had a client not long ago that they want to get to the point where they have nice dashboards and everything, and not just spend information, but information about how their organization is performing. Uh,
Mhm.
and they can't get it, or it takes so much time and effort to get it that by the time they have it, it's really not very usable at that point. So they're really struggling with how to get at that data, and they're either throwing resources at it, where they've got two or three data analysts that are trying to do that work, or they just can't get at it because of the number of ERP systems or those things. So these orchestration tools are going to hopefully help out with that, and the ability to get that information and data.
So, Matt, I know you probably know, but we're hearing nothing but positive comments around orchestration, and that they feel that it's finally solving the fundamental operational problems related to procurement technology complexity. So, what exactly about procurement orchestration, and maybe go back to a definition to start, makes it the kind of solutions that is a solution that works where other ones have failed to move the needle?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think to kind of define it, for one thing, let's define what it's not, right? It's not another silo. Orchestration is a connective tissue. And so it's about managing and automating and optimizing all the little handoffs between applications, people, right? The human side being really critical, and data, and closing all those little in gaps in time, in signal and knowledge, in uncertainty about processes and what that next step is. Um, now, compared to sort of the previous generation of solutions for these problems, um, traditional iPaaS or hard-coded workflows tie one trigger to one action. Orchestration is about many-to-many logic instead of sort of point-to-point plumbing. So orchestration means listening to composite events across multiple systems, routing tasks based on policy and stakeholder and context so that you can adapt without ripping and replacing. It's built for not just sort of those quote unquote happy paths, but the exceptions as well, right? So, the survey kind of showed what, it's the manual fire drills are sort of that real time sync. Orchestration embeds that conditional branching and human in the loop steps so that those edge cases are handled automatically instead of kicked back to email. And ultimately, you get simplification, you get adoption, right? When requesters can stay in their native tools and the process still enforces policy behind the scenes, you reduce your cycle times and your compliance gaps. You're addressing a lot of the root causes that this survey flagged rather than again adding another point solution that people ignore.
So can I ask you probably a dumb question, Matt? But when I first heard of process orchestration, the word orchestration to me means, and this probably sounds stupid, but somebody up there who's just it's a tool that goes up there and says, now the bass comes in, and now the violin, and now this, and now that, and then you all play together beautifully. Is that a dumb way to look at it?
No, I mean I think that is an apt metaphor, and Tonkin, we've got our logo, which is the little monkey. His name is Maestro. For that very reason, right? Thematically, I think you're spot on. It is the notion of bringing together all these disparate parts, right? An oboe sounds very different from a timpani, right? But together they can make beautiful music. Well, I don't know if just those two together, but an entire orchestra together can make beautiful music. And so, yeah, I like that as a metaphor.
Okay, good. Because go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
I was gonna say I'm here for this band geek conversation as a former band geek, but I think our former methods rely on everyone in the orchestra having practice, being in tune, etc., and that the orchestration layer now accounts for, ooh, oboe's a little out of tune, right? Or that person didn't practice, or this isn't sounding right. I need more of this. And so that exception-based rule, it's a lovely metaphor, I think. But one thing that kind of I want to tie back to your point, Matt, is I think everyone knows kind of the 2D model of procurement, right? We've all seen the chevrons on the screen, the 7-step sourcing processes, this is what happens upstream versus downstream, and it all has to happen in a certain order. I think orchestration allows us to go 3D. Multiple things are happening at the same time. Our operating models are now kind of like an atom, right? Like they're floating around this nucleus of procurement happening. And I think that people don't think about process logically that way because it's not ingrained globally yet. It's very easy to think about step-by-step process. It's less easy to think about multi-tenant things happening at the same time and all of the if-then statements that are related to those. So that new operating model has to be built in the process areas and the people areas, I think, before you can automate it.
Yeah. So Matt, you had a poll that we were going to put up.
Yeah.
So folks, the poll's going to launch in just a minute. And if you use multiple screens, very simple question. Have you or someone on your team purchased new software over the past 12 months? And if anyone answers no, I'll be shocked. But I'm going to leave it to the audience to answer. Because I want to ask you guys a wrap-up question before we go to the Q&A. And folks, we will, if we don't get to your question in the Q&A, I promise that our presenters will type up an answer, the question and the answer, and send it out to everyone. So you will get your responses, just maybe we won't get to all the questions live today. 15% said no. I'm shocked. What do you think, Matt?
I would say I'm shocked as well. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, so a question for all of you. What are you encouraged to see from the responses pertaining to investment priorities and technology ambitions for 2025 and beyond? And I would say definitely beyond 2025 because we're halfway through the year. So are you encouraged by the investment priorities and technology ambitions, or are you discouraged because people aren't investing enough? Which way do you see it? I'll start with you, Sheena.
Ugh. I mean, yes, I think is my answer there. I think that a lot of mindsets and thinking need to change before investment can be made that is meaningful. Going back to the Band-Aid conversation, I also see a dissonance in where people are investing based on the survey data versus where we're hearing their actual problem sets are. I think SRM was super low on the list, but one of the number one things we hear is I don't know how to do X with my suppliers.
Yep.
They're impossible to onboard. They're not bringing me any innovation. So it's yes, I love that comment. I think there's reluctance to automate chaos. I would agree with that, and I think that with longer buying cycles and more stakeholders than ever involved in technology buying cycles and a lot of failed tech implementations over the past 5 years, it's difficult to get the investment, not just monetary, but the mental and physical investment of getting a new system in. So I don't think I'm disappointed in anything. I think I just am a realist, I guess. So Jamie, Matt, I'd be curious to hear your
I,
perspective.
I agree with what you're saying. I think we're seeing a lot of people asking a lot more questions before they want to invest because they haven't seen the return on things that they've done in the past, or the tools haven't done what they said they were going to do, or it costs more than it was budgeted to do. So we're just seeing a lot more people question. They're not as quick to spend the money. They're asking a lot more detailed questions and a lot more. They want to have a lot more understanding of what they're going to get for it.
Well, and that is the right thing to do because we have seen a lot of failed investments in the past. So
Mhm.
what about you, Matt?
One thing I was heartened by was the overall attitudes we saw toward artificial intelligence tool adoption. I was pleasantly surprised by the levels of current adoption for some of those basic use cases. And you could tell that people are being thoughtful about how they approach a lot of these questions, because as we know, um, this is a emerging sort of uh, uh, part of these technologies that has so much promise, but a intentional approach to how it's implemented, considering the questions around governance, around data quality, around how it interacts with your existing infrastructure, are just so critical. And so I think we have a sample of folks who've done a lot of thinking about these questions.
Yeah, but I am constantly surprised at how many companies don't have a policy around AI,
Hmm.
established policy. Because both in procurement, we use AI, but we're also procuring AI for marketing or, product development. We're procuring it all across the company on behalf of our requesters, but we don't have a policy about how it's evaluated and what biases we might be introducing or what kind of risk we might be introducing. So once again, plug for SIGU, we have a course about that because it's such a big issue. So I'm going to go to some of the audience questions, if you don't mind. And at Matt, this is a question for you. There are several companies that claim to be leaders in the orchestration space. I think Tonkean your reputation is stellar. So where do you see that you differentiate in the marketplace?
Uh, how about that? Everyone claims to be a leader, right? But yeah, I'm happy to address that. So I would point to a few things. One is we have a different kind of ambition than some of the other players in our category. We do not want to become your procured play, your source to pay platform, right? Coupa, SAP, they consider us partners and not competitors. We want to come and make your existing tech stack work. The power tools that you've invested in and are critical to your workflows, we want to make those things work better for everybody. Second, we have a native orchestration engine. We were actually in the no-code orchestration category long before we came to procurement specifically. Tonkean's been around since 2015, and we really in the last 4 years have launched our procurement solution. Um, we are, Tonkean is built to handle enterprise complexity as opposed to being oriented toward sort of maturing the processes of mid-market procurement teams. We have more than 250, I think closer to 300 native connectors that we've built and we manage. Look at several of the other players in our category are built on a third-party iPaaS that is sort of white labeled. That works great about 80 or 90% of the time for enterprise processes. That 10 to 20%, right, when there's one or two more wrinkles, can be killer. The third thing I'd point to is, Tonkean's a leader in bringing AI into procurement workflows in ways that offer real value. So beyond that front door, right, having a chat bot, an LLM wrapper that can answer basic questions, that's table stakes now. Forget just, procurement orchestration and intake. Every SaaS product has that now. You have to. Having a co-pilot experience that rides alongside the requester throughout the entire life cycle is an entirely different thing, and that's what Tonkean has. Second, real agents, right? So sure, you can ask Tonkean to draft an RFP for you. It will do that. You can also ask it to carry out an entire sourcing project for you and bring the human into the loop at those critical junctures. And there's a pretty huge gulf between those sort of two levels of capability, right? So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and plus, I just want to emphasize, I mean, you've focused on procurement more recently in this past decade, but you have been doing this for a
Yes.
long time in other parts of the organization. So you've
Yep.
perfected the orchestration before you even came to procurement, where other ones built themselves as a procurement tool first and foremost,
Yes.
and never perfected the orchestration part of it. So kudos to you. We hear great things. So I'm not sure who this was addressed to, but on the importance of data quality and governance and the data being bought for AI, do you get the sense that procurement leads and teams who need to manage that data governance process, or teams needed to make that successful? Other teams?
I mean, I think an entire company, as to your point, Don, needs governance and compliance around data that is mandated from the top down, or from the bottom up for the teams who are actually manipulating the data and using it. I don't think there should be any single responsibility assigned for data, but it obviously does need to lead up to like kind of one throat to choke, I suppose. I don't know. Jamie, what do you think there?
No, I agree with you. I think it's got to be an organizational wide thing. It can't just be, in pockets, especially where AI is going to touch multiple areas of the business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
The different types of data that people are buying organizationally that are being used for a million different purposes. Risk data can be used in so many different ways across an organization. And so you have to think about the usage of your data set.
Yeah, there's a saying in risk is that, managing third-party risk management or managing third-party risk, it's a team sport. It can't belong to just one person or one part of the organization. Everybody has to understand that you're introducing risk. And in this case, everyone has to understand how you're using the data that you're gathering through this. So it is a team sport. So Matt, maybe more towards you for the next question. How do you measure hard dollar ROI for orchestration? Because you're driving so much in procurement terms, soft savings, productivity gains. So how do people typically address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hard dollar savings sort of flow downstream from those sort of soft productivity gains, right? So if you can increase requester adoption of your official processes and keep people from using side doors, keep them from bringing in after the fact POs and so forth, you are going to improve your spend under management, your spend influence. You're going to reduce maverick spend, and as such, you can increase spend savings on both indirect and direct procurement, right? And so that has a bottom line impact right there. I think the other kind of key thing I would point to is, time is money. And if you can accelerate procurement cycles by better managing those handoffs across applications, data, and people and teams, and you can tamp down on confusion and uncertainty, critical projects are going to move faster. And when you can do that, you can both improve things on the revenue and cost side, and that has a bottom line impact as well.
Yeah, and I agree. As a recovering CPA, I am passionate about the fact that you can find and you can demonstrate where soft savings actually hit your general ledger.
Mhm.
If you understand total cost of ownership, if you dig into the process steps, it and people, I would tell you that sometimes you find an arm, sometimes you get a whole body, sometimes you get a leg, but eventually you get two arms, two legs, a body, and a head. You have a full FTE that's actually not needed in the process any longer. But if you don't track it from the get-go, you just have body parts laying around and you say, well, those are worthless. But you can make that into a hard savings if you track it well enough. So I do encourage people to look at total cost of ownership when you're doing something like this and really looking at your process steps. And if you understand your process map, you can identify really hard productivity gains. So that would be a challenge I'd throw back to all of you, but I'm, of course, just a number nerd. So in the so this is to Matt, did the State of Procurement Tech Stack report provide insights on organizational functional structure or skill requirements for procurement professionals? That's interesting.
So, sorry, go ahead, Don.
No, I'm saying that it's interesting to me because I don't know how it would actually identify a gap unless you ask those questions. Did you?
No, and it definitely would be an interesting area to probe into. When you're designing a survey like this, you have to make a bunch of little trade-offs um, uh, between the length of the survey and the response rate you can expect to get for it. And so that this time around was not an area that we prioritized for probing into. Maybe next year we do dig deeper into that, but no, this was I think a 37 question survey, and we may have had some things that went in that direction in an early draft of the survey, but we did not go there. But it's an interesting direction and idea for next time.
Yeah. So, and Matt, I'm going to ask you this because when I was at Coupa Inspire this year, I heard about their agentic AI and that they're trying to help with orchestration. And yet I talked to Tonkin and other players there, and they said, we're not worried about that because it's totally different from what we do. So somebody out here has asked, what is your reaction to them creating this? Are you threatened by it, or is it something that you feel is, well, that's just par for the course, but you're so different?
Yeah, I mean, so a few reactions to that. Number one, I think it sort of validates a trend, right? That the big S2P suites adding better or enhanced intake and requester experiences sort of tells us that the market is seeing the same pain that our survey has surfaced here.
Yes.
That tool sprawl and manual routing and everything is killing cycle time. I think part of this comes down to, okay, how do you define orchestration, and and making sure that you sort of, we talk about intake and orchestration as a category, because there are so many ways that they play into one another and benefit one another, but they are, in a certain sense, two very different things. Orchestration that happens within a given suite or walled garden is not orchestration in the same sense that Tonkin talks about orchestration. There's a reason that Tonkin and Coupa, we consider ourselves very close partners. We're on their app marketplace. We go to their events and all that. They introduce us to their customers. The nearly 300 connectors in our library open up for their customers such a broader world of possibilities with respect to what they can connect, what they can automate, and so forth. And so, no,
the distinction is that their orchestration is within their tool,
yes,
or their suite. Is that, and
yes,
and your orchestration goes above it and goes out to all the various ERPs and other systems and everything else that has to be accessed, including policies and regulations and things like that. Is that
correct?
Yeah. And so, folks, that I really do want to point out, though, this is why Coupa is a great partner of Tonkin, and they need Tonkin because regardless of what they're orchestrating within their tool, they're not going outside their tool. And that's what Tonkin does
Yeah,
best.
And I want to clarify, I don't know if you could say that categorically. I think that, there are integrations there that play into their automations and orchestrations.
Oh,
When you
absolutely.
consider the scope and scale of a library and we talked about the, multifactorial complexity of enterprise processes and what it means to have deep orchestration capabilities. Um, it is that sort of, going from good to great with it that I think we can help address.
Yeah. So I was just reminded we are at the top of the hour, so we are done with Q&A. I could talk to you guys forever, though. This has been so interesting. So, folks, we are going to, if you have any other questions, make sure we're going to send out the contact information for Sheena, Jamie, and Matt, so you can keep the conversation going. And of course, anytime you have a question, send it to us. We will get it to the right person. With that, I want to thank you for your hour today. And I'm sorry we went over by 1 minute. I don't usually do that, but you guys were so interesting. So with that, we're going to tell everyone just have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are. Stay safe, stay happy, and we'll see you next week in our Power Hour webinar. You will get this within about 24 hours from now. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, everyone.